Alright everyone, so what I thought I'd do, since there's nothing really critical about how or when the cab is assembled, in other words, it doesn't have to be over here on step 9 or whatever, because there's nothing dependent on it elsewhere, I can just go ahead and assemble this. So we got a pretty good line all the way around here, just with a bit of sanding. So when a part comes off a tree, it can look pretty much like this. All the mating surfaces are the edges where it joins to the other parts. We'll have things that need to be cleaned up. And some of those things are big, like this, or relatively. And then some of the issues are smaller, like this. And so you want to get everything as cleaned up as you can. There's these ejector pin marks where the machinery punches the parts out of the molds. There are also areas where the plastic was fed into the mold, and that's what you end up with, typically along the edges. So you need to have a nice flat surface in the case of the way this part's going to be installed or fitted. And you can see that's supposed to come right in here, and as it looks, the inside surface of this part is already pretty clean. I have gone around and for the most part cleaned up the two halves of the cab already, but we just want to come to a point where we have a nice straight line all the way around without really any air gaps, and that's almost what we have here. If I had to say this was a standoff, or that there was a standoff, I think it's this edge here. So this is a pretty coarse grit sandpaper. I use this one when I don't want to be sitting here all day. You know, if you're going to use something lighter for finer work, typically what I'll use on a wood or plastic kit is a 60, 80, 120, and then the real finer, much finer grits to get a polish, to get toward where we're ready to prime the surface for paint. But to clean parts up and get things shaped, that's where you want to use coarser sandpaper. And the idea again is to get these surfaces flat. That's why you want to use a sanding block. If you don't use a block and you're just folding sandpaper, you're going to get an uneven surface and probably not get a good joint on surfaces that need to be flat in order to achieve that. Around the corners, what you end up with sometimes is as the plastic is bent this way, it can push out the plastic unevenly at the corners and cause a bulge that keeps you from having that flat transition, that 90-degree flat transition. You get a bulge somewhere out here, and that forces a gap into the components, into the plastic parts. That's kind of what we're looking at. Still just a little bit of so the reason I want to sand across that corner is to draw both surfaces flat to each other, so that if you set it on tabletop, it would lie flat. And that's what it has to do in order for. And you can see there's an air gap on this side, just a slight. All right. bit of space there. There's going to be some. I'm not going to get this to go to draw completely flat. I'm going to try, but there's going to be a need to use filler. We're not going to be able to get this just with adhesive. We can try, but I think the odds are pretty good. That's going to take a little bit of filler. They're still standing off on that edge. The near edge is pretty good. This side here looks pretty good. There's just a little bit of an airspace on this side. It's persistent, so let's try. Yeah, that's progress. Okay. We'll go ahead and start with the glue, and then we'll come back later with filler after everything dries for a little while. So the liquid cement sets up actually pretty well, but it's also quite strong. Got a fan going here, and you always want to have some nice ventilation going whenever you're using the solvent-based materials, solvent-based adhesives or paint. It's just to stay healthy. So once I get a good weld with this stuff, I'm going to come back with the super glue. I'll come back with this stuff and just put a bead all the way around and smooth that out. And that's for added strength. The liquid cement is good. It welds the plastic pretty good, which is what you want. The CYA glue, this super glue, will just add an extra layer of material to the back side of the seam inside of the cab. So that edge looks pretty good. A little bit of bleed through, but that's all right. Now we're going to work on the other side. Pretty good. And whatever happens, whatever glue gets onto the top of the cab on the exterior, that can easily be sanded off. The liquid cement, unlike some of the others, is really fine, and so it doesn't leave a large buildup. It's just a very thin film of adhesive. So refinishing and polishing the plastic is not a big deal if that glue does happen to get loose, as it were. I really want to put some pressure on these. This is where most of the air gap is. The other side seems to have gone pretty tightly together, this wall. It's just a question of getting that other wall together as well. But as I said, we know for a fact it's going to take some filler to get this seam to disappear. from the exterior view. And yeah, I don't know why they molded this cab in two parts like this. It's just needless. Must have been just, you know, a challenge. It must have just been intended to be a challenge. Alright, so once we get the cab built up, and I might leave the back wall off since that looks like it goes in pretty nicely. Looks like it gets a pretty good fit. Shouldn't need any filler. I think what I'll do is just put these two pieces together and then really reinforce that seam, and we'll call that a day. I just wanted to get to a start on this one and kind of talk about this joining of these two halves, because as I've said on other YouTube videos, model makers are never slow to criticize this particular kit for this particular reason. Now, let's look at this round. So you can see a little bit of adhesive came through, so getting those cleaned up. I have to be careful around those rivets, but I don't want to lose those. But that is going to take a bit of filler. And what we'll do, I almost poured that on the outside, didn't I? The way we'll apply the fillers, we'll mask either side of that seam about 1/8 of an inch on each side, just as if we were going to paint a stripe there. Because literally we are going to paint the stripe, we're just going to paint it with filler instead of paint. So to keep the filler from going all over the side of the cab and causing you to have to sand across those rivets, this way the sanding can be focused just onto the seam. And I'm trying to flush that as I press, flush that gap out a little bit, make it flatter. You can see how quickly that liquid cement creates a weld. That's literally what it does, is it welds the plastic together. Yeah, it's trying to cure. Still a bit of an airspace there. Anytime the adhesive the two sides can't come together, it's probably just a fraction of a millimeter space in there. But if the plastic sides, if the two pieces don't meet, they won't melt together, they won't fuse. And I think that's what we've got going on there. Oh, this sticks out a little bit, so we kind of have to come off the edge here. So what I'm doing is pressing down flat against the table surface, which gives us our flat surface, and then pressing together to try and get that to knit up nice and tight. So how you doing? Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, that's still soft. All right. Well, it's just going to have to be what we're dealing with there. But I can sure see what the griping has been about. want these rivet lines to line up across the top of the cab here. So all this alignment, again, is going to matter at the end when this cab has to fit over the chassis and fit over the motor and all these other interior components. But this is pretty good. I think we got where we need to be. These are lining up. There's a little bit of adhesive chuff to get off of there. So that'll just take a little bit of work. You do this at the same time as I'm working on that seam. Yeah, we're gonna lose some rivets when we do this, but that's okay. Like I keep saying, it is what it is.